Welcome to Don't Waste the Chaos, the podcast where we dive into transparent conversations at the intersection of business, leadership, and life. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts, and today I'm thrilled to introduce a remarkable guest whose career and expertise exemplify excellence in HR, business strategy, and organizational leadership. Tara Parris is a dynamic and accomplished executive leader with over a decade of experience driving business growth and optimizing organizational efficiency. Her background spans healthcare, security, real estate, commercial transportation and logistics, and insurance, where we met. Tara has built her career as a trusted advisor and valuable asset to the companies and industries she's served. Tara holds a bachelor's degree in business management and HR from Park University and a master's in legal studies in business law and HR employment law from Arizona State University. Beyond her professional accomplishments, she's actively involved in volunteer work. And when she's not excelling in her career or giving back, Tara enjoys life in Lee's Summit, Missouri with her husband, 2 children, and her 2 very energetic boxers. Whether she's attending sporting events, exploring KC, or traveling, she loves creating meaningful connections and memories with her family and friends. Tara, welcome to the pod.
Thanks so much for having me.
So this is going to be an extra fun conversation because if you've been tuning into the podcast for the last year that we've been running this, you've got used to my voice, and literally Tara and I are 2 peas in a pod when it comes to life and our perspective on HR. So I'm super excited to have Tara in here with us today. So in today's episode, we're going to break down some of the most persistent stereotypes about HR and explore how they've impacted the profession over time. So Tara, with your wealth of experience in both corporate and consulting roles, I'm really excited to hear your insights on this topic. So let's kick off talking about the policy police stereotype. Ironic since your husband's in law enforcement, but HR is often seen as the enforcer of rules and policies rather than a strategic partner. How have you experienced this, or how have you countered this perception in your roles in the past?
Yeah, you're right. So it is HR. We are the policy police. At least that is definitely the stigma that everybody has. And I think fundamentally, and this will probably answer a lot of the questions that you have today and how I feel, it's great that you've written policies for 10 years and you know how to do a handbook and you know how to pick benefits for your organization. But if you don't understand the business, that's all you're ever going to be seen as. You don't have a seat at the table. You're not going to have a seat at the table if that's where your focus is and you don't understand the business. You're not doing it right. If you're an HR professional, you're not doing it right. It's a disservice to the organization that you're working for. And so you shouldn't ever just be the policy police. That is how you get put in the box of not being a strategic partner. Do you actually understand how the business operates? Are you having conversations with the leadership to understand what is it they're looking at on a daily basis? If all hell breaks loose, can you actually go and sit with, a customer service rep or help finance out with building a spreadsheet because they're looking at budgets and they just don't have time? Can you actually interject yourself in other pieces of the business in a way that they know you understand? And it goes back to relationship building too. But we sit in a different seat where if we go in as a consultant, they recognize that there are some problems there. And so it's a lot easier for us to step in and say, hey, we see all of these issues. I can do this piece of it that you've brought me on for, but you've got about 10 other things that you really need to look at. And it's that relationship building and poking holes in things outside of HR or aligning the two in the strategy and saying, I can take this human capital piece and I can actually align it with your organization's strategy and the things that you're trying to do.
I love that you said seat at the table. And I hate that phrase. I hate that phrase. I have just come to despise that phrase because I have heard, being in HR circles for 20 years, it's been 2 decades worth of people being like, how do I get a seat at the table? And here's what I'll say. For my 20 years in corporate America, it's not a phrase that came out of my mouth. And if it ever did, guess what I did? I freaking quit.
Yeah.
I'm not and I'm not saying because I'm a quitter. I'm just saying I'm not going to live in an organization that doesn't value what I bring to the table or my skill sets. So I'm going to move on. I mean, not before I make painstakingly clear the value that I bring, because I want to give them the opportunity to see that. But if they can't see that, move on, HR pros. If you truly are an integrated, valuable asset to the business and someone can't see that, move the heck on. But the first thing you should do is question yourself
Yep.
Do I understand this business? Do I understand how they make money, what their greatest risks are, what the competitive advantage is, what the main competitors are bringing to the table, like all of that. Once I've understood all of that and I'm still not being heard and listened to, it's probably because I'm not communicating effectively. It's likely a me issue, or the executive team doesn't know how to run a business and you should move on.
Yeah, all super factual. So, and I will agree with you that the statement in and of itself is cringeworthy to me, but it's the reality of the profession. I mean,
Yes.
it really is. And again, I think there's the stigma around it, but there's decades and decades of people that it's easier to just kind of put your head down and I'm going to write this policy and I'm going to kind of stay in my lane. And that's great. But again, I think if you're truly doing what you should be for the organization, that's a disservice for you to just put your head down and say, here's what I'm going to do. And it goes into what your relationship then looks like with the employees, because, as HR people, you are supposed to be the advocate. Let's be real honest. There's a fine line that you walk on a daily basis of trying to make sure you're being the best advocate that you can be and putting all those things in place for your employees to make it a good place to work. But you also have to protect the business, and it's not fun, and it creates a lot of burnout in HR professionals. And so it's just easier to kind of put your head down sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's a disservice to your people and to the business. And knowing, your employees, they look at you different and you're not just the policy police. If they understand that, hey, this person like really gets what my day to day looks like, they understand the business, they understand what the goal is. And then you can also speak to them and help them get to the goal, because you should be having conversations with the leadership to really understand what that goal is and where the light is at the end of the tunnel. And that's how you kind of disseminate that information to them and align the two, which is where, again, I think a lot of HR professionals fail because we're just putting our heads down and saying it's easier for me. I'm just going to update this and do what the boss asks and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, that's a funny statement considering two people on this call have a really hard time taking that kind of do what the boss says and just perform. Yeah. So speaking of, we are two women on this call and two women who have been in HR and people ops for decades. So that stereotype, HR is for women. Like HR has historically been seen as a female dominated field. How do you think this stereotype has impacted the way HR is perceived?
Great question. And again, very accurate. I think just as a societal norm, like women are your caretakers, right? I think in any sort of organization, you see a lot of women that are in more administrative functions or the finance functions. And it's the behind the scenes, behind the desk. And that's kind of where you land. And I think because fundamentally HR is looked at as you're supposed to be the administrator of policies and things like that, it just has kind of, I guess, lured women into the role. And once it became female dominated, I don't think a lot of men step into it. I think operations, that's the power role in the business, right? Like that's the wheelhouse. That's what makes it tick. That's where the money's at. And so I think, again, with men being seen as the more dominant gender, if you will, oftentimes end up in the operations of the business instead of setting in the people function. And again, I think that's where HR has kind of lost some of its value and it's seen as the policy police, and we don't have the real seat at the table. I know you hate the word. I think that's why. I think it's just societal norm that just says women are admin and caretaker, and here are the things, and you need to, for lack of a better way of saying it, kind of babysit the people and make sure everybody's happy. Just like, a lot of women are seen to be doing at home, like make sure the family's happy and everybody's taken care of. And so it's hard to break that stereotype. And it goes back to me saying, be involved in the business. Show that there is more value to what you can do and bring to the table than just writing those policies and making sure that people are taken care of in that regard. And until there are more women or more HR professionals that kind of break that stereotype, it is unfortunately going to be a vicious cycle. And that's why I go back to saying, like, if that's the box that you live in, you're doing a disservice to the business that you work for.
Yeah. And I know you know this because the way that you and I both naturally talk about business. But when I am on a discovery call with a potential client, I every single time will say, what are we operating in? Are we in the black or are we in the red? And I can tell, like most of the time I'm talking to male CEOs, every once in a while a female, but most of the time I'm talking to a male CEO. And when I am that direct, I physically see them fall back on the call. They're like, Okay. They're not expecting that. And
Yeah.
honestly, it bums me out. And a lot of times I end up on a freaking tirade talking to them about it. Like, you should have expected that question from me. Like, if I'm going to help you talk about your compensation data strategy, if
Yep.
I'm going to help you talk about what your budget is for performance increases, how we're recruiting and making sure we're staying competitive, what our benefit strategy looks like, the largest line item on your P&L is your people. So if HR people aren't
Yep.
talking about the monies, but as women, most women, like I know you and I are highly offensive to a lot of people, but we'll talk about the money. I have no problem being like, here's the deal with the money. Here's how I've gotten here with the money. I'm money motivated. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
most women won't talk about that. So until you are comfortable talking about the monies, you're never going to be seen as somebody who can like actually make strategic decisions. Because if you don't get the money, like what's the point of the business? It's here to make money.
Yeah. And I think too, that kind of speaks to, I think one of the things that you have to learn and get really good at as an HR professional is knowing your audience. Because when you have conversations with different people, your conversation with the CEO is going to be a whole lot different than your CFO. Business is a numbers game. And as much as you're supposed to be there for, engagement and making sure the right people are in the right places, it's still a numbers game at the end of the day. And if you're just the HR professional that, finance gives you your budget and you're like, okay, great, I'll do this. And this is how I'm going to do merit. But like, are you getting into the nuts and bolts of like, what can you do with that? How much can you save the business with having the right people? What does it look like for your turnover and how much the business spent on that because the CEO didn't want to give raises? Like, the numbers matter, and understanding who you're having conversations with and where their brain is and what their focus is makes a very big difference in how far you get at having that seat at the table, because then they understand that you understand what actually needs to take place and where their end goals are.
Yeah, it's so true. So the next stereotype is that HR only cares about the company. And this is such a funny stereotype to me because I was just on a podcast last night, and it was a podcast of a physician, and he helps coach physicians how to run their business, which I'm sure you and I would both agree is a great need. And we see this in healthcare all of the time. They're great practitioners, or they're a great attorney, or they're a great accountant, and they can't run their business, but they're amazing at their stuff. But anyway, his perspective is HR the ally for us? So it depends on what seat you're sitting in. I think if you're the business owner, you're like, HR only cares about the people, keeping everyone kumbaya. But I think the employee perspective is the HR only cares about the company. And so therein lies a huge tension. But employees often feel like HR is there to protect the organization rather than advocate for individuals. How do you feel like we balance these expectations?
Also, a great question. And look, like we are, right? Your number one job is to make sure that you are limiting risk and liability for the business. Like that is the goal at the end of the day. But there is a balance there. And if you're good at what you do, you can find it. And again, it goes back to building those relationships and making sure that the people know that you understand what they're also up against. Like the people know at the end of the day, I've had a lot of people work for me that I would consider to be like friends almost. And I know that that's like a no for HR, but let's be real honest. Like you work with these people for 8+ hours a day and you know all about their families and their lives. And so that line, I want to say gets blurred, but you know more than what you should if you're just here for the business. Right. And so work for you and you might be friends with them, but at the end of the day, they also knew like if they really messed up, they were going to have to see our side of me, right? And so it goes back to that relationship building, making sure that they understand that you understand where they're at and what their struggles are. And you can find that balance in making sure that you're trying to make the environment and the things that they have, whether it's benefits or, hey, we're going to bring on some more people so that you guys have more capacity. You have to understand both sides. And that's where you have to align what they need with what the business needs so that everybody can be on the same page. Because you're not just there as the policy police. You're not just there to make their lives more difficult with, you were 5 minutes late today. And so now we're going to write you up for it. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to protect the business from the bigger things, make sure that it's running smoothly, but also make sure that your people are happy because it's your people who are making the wheels turn for the rest of the business.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm hearing you say it's like a translator position. Like for the
This,
employees, it's like helping them understand the purpose of the role, how it impacts the bottom line of the business. And then for the executive team, it's like helping them understand that the money doesn't get made if the people aren't happy. So it's
yeah.
like literally mediation. How do you feel like, and kind of going off the rails a little bit here, but do you feel like you've sat in a seat where people have been like, you play both sides or whatever? Like, do you feel like you're in conflict a lot of times in your HR role?
Yeah. So I would say probably early on in my career, there was this level of like naiveness that existed there that it is that struggle, right? And so you have these people that come to you and they're like, I have all these problems. And so you want to fix all the things. And then you have the business saying, hey, like this is what it needs to be. And, we're not giving raises and we're not doing this, but you're the one that hears the people come in and say, I can't make my rent payment or I can't do this. And so it you are torn and it can be exhausting. And so my biggest piece of advice to HR professionals that do feel that way is you have to learn how to build relationships and do it very, very quickly. Once you have that figured out and you understand the business, it makes it a whole lot easier to have those conversations with the employees that come to you with stuff. Because a lot of times when they come with things and you're trying to like be the advocate and have those conversations, they don't understand what the end goal of business is. If I'm going to say, hey, I need you to go do X, Y, and Z for me, why? Why do I have to go do those things? And making sure that they understand the fundamentals and like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing and where do I fit into the business helps to build those relationships. And it helps to ease that tension because then everybody knows what their role is and the why behind it. And so there's a lot less complaining and you don't have to play that middleman where it's the conflict of, I don't like this. And the business is saying, well, I don't care that they don't like it. We still have to do these things.
Yeah. Oh, that's very true. So, gosh, there's so many stereotypes that I know you and I could go through about HR. And I just feel like you and I just don't sit inside of those stereotypes. We sit inside of some other ones, but we don't sit inside of the traditional HR stereotypes. So it's just interesting for us to be talking about that. But what about, we were talking about burnout earlier. You mentioned that the stereotype of the burnt out HR pro, because HR roles are often seen as emotionally draining, and I think you and I can both agree that they are. How do you maintain balance and passion for your work?
You don't. So
You
there's no
medicate.
right. Again, if you're doing it right, it's long hours. It's not all rainbows and butterflies. Not every day is going to be a good day. And you have to be prepared for that. I think mental toughness is definitely a character trait that you need to have if it's a role that you're going to sit in. Because look, it's not just the business that you're going to be concerned about. It's not just the struggles of, hey, we didn't meet our quotas and people aren't getting bonuses, or hey, there's a struggle over here and we're going to have to lay a handful of people off. Like those are stressors that I don't think a lot of people think about when they get into the HR profession. Because if you've never had to sit in front of anybody, but let's just say for arbitrary numbers sake, the boss says, hey, we need to let go of 10 people or we're not going to be able to keep the lights on. That feeling of sitting in front of somebody and knowing that you're about to change their, livelihood, they have families and things like that. And so it's mentally draining. It's exhausting. It can be emotional. And it really is difficult to find the balance. And the thing is, like, you don't walk away from any of those situations feeling good about it. Few and far between. Like sometimes, let's be real, people get themselves fired and those are a whole lot easier to deal with.
Yes.
But you have, there's the whole gamut. Like people have lives. Every single person that comes into an organization, they have lives. They can have healthcare issues. They might have family members that have that. They might have a kid that has, special needs. Like there's so many different things that end up on your desk that you have to manage and mitigate. And you as a person, more often than not, you want to be able to bend and give and be understanding of all of those things while there's this whole handful of things that the business actually needs and it has to stay running, right? Because if it doesn't, then you have the rest of your staff that you're also putting in jeopardy if the wheels don't keep turning. And so there is no good answer to your question. I think, again, it goes back to having that like mental toughness. I would suggest finding ways to decompress outside of work and trying to find a method to set some of that down, because the emotion is always going to be there. It's always going to be mentally taxing, and you do have to find some outlets outside of work and not carry it with you all the time.
Yeah, I love that concept of mental toughness. And I think a lot of people don't intentionally build that, but like times that we push ourselves past the limit in a workout, we're building mental toughness. Times that we navigate a really hard situation and come out on the other side, we're building up grit. And then when we're faced with things that are really hard, we're like, we have something to draw upon. And so I think that's huge. If you haven't read like Grit by Angela Duckworth or any of David Goggins' stuff, or follow Dan Martell, like there's lots of people out there who get down into the nitty gritty of what this takes. And I think a lot of people get into HR and think it's going to be like fun. And to those people, I would say, you've lost your damn mind. Like there are going to be days that are fun. But when I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about, I worked at one organization and I wasn't being paid appropriately, but I just knew that when the business hit, that I was going to get paid.
Yep.
And I let that happen. And people were treating me like crap, and I was letting it happen. And we were having to draw on a line of credit to make payroll almost every month at a certain time of year, because our year was front heavy. And so toward the end of the year, because of not great money management from a number of different issues, we'd be in the red. We'd be pulling on a line of credit. And so I've got like my accounting person who's stressing because she knows the reality, the controller who's stressing, I'm stressing, and that's sitting on my shoulders. And I have to be like, who wants pizza for the lunch and learn? It's like a real HR pro has to get in there. I had another organization that we were going to term 400 people. It was can't give away the organization because I got gagged, of course, when I left there, which is very common for a high level HR pro. And I know you know that. So without getting into my gag, essentially, I knew we had to cut a large sum of people. It was going to make everything look really bad for the senior leaders. And so I was a part of the team who made the recommendation, even though the recommendation was essentially made for me because of the budget. And then I acted on it. And then when the head of this organization, I can't even say his title or it would give it away, he literally said that me and my team went rogue and that we did that be outside of the scope because he had to save face, or he wasn't going to be able to be the leader anymore because he was going to be on the news, a large enough of an organization. So I had to eat that pile of crap and take that inside myself, leave the organization because I didn't fit the culture, even though it was all pre-planned. That is a strategic HR person. And so, if you're sitting in HR and you're like clawing for the seat at the table, you better buckle up, Buttercup, because when you sit at the table, stuff gets real. And I think you're missing it. Like, what are some of the things that you've had? I know we could go through this all day, but what are a couple of the things that you've had to navigate in a real strategic HR role?
I mean, ironically enough, I think you would find if anybody has sat in any larger organization, it's going to be a very similar situation. So I can tell you, no surprise here that you and I have lived a lot of the same experiences, very similar. Knowing that we're pulling money from a money market account to funnel in for payroll because here's how this is going to work for the rest of the year. And every single time I'm hitting up the, accounts payable, like, have these things gone out? Hey, hold these.
Yes.
Because like we still have to pay people, or I mean, it's all so similar. And I think to your point, any strategic HR person who has like really gotten into the nitty gritty and like down and dirty with like what HR actually is, has experienced some of those. And I always laugh. You said talking about anybody who gets into it because they think it's going to be fun and exciting. I've done some Mint throughout the years. And one of the questions that I always ask people is, why HR? Like, what brings you here? What is it about it that you want to do? And they're younger, obviously, more often than not when they come into the mentorship style programs. And so it's like, well, I want to do all these engagement pieces and I want to like make the culture great. And that all of that's wonderful. But I typically laugh when I get that response. And I know that it probably doesn't set well, but that's like my brain saying like, you have no idea what you're in for here. And so I always say, I'm like, that's really great, but understand, here's what's actually going to happen. Like, if you're doing it right, here are the things that are going to take place. And are you prepared for that? Because this notion that it is rainbows and butterflies and that everything is going to be great and it's going to be easy and you're just going to plan the pizza parties and you're going to like plan the potlucks and hand out rewards to people. That's about 2% of what you're actually going to end up doing. Be prepared for a really rough ride because it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Probably don't want to be in the profession as much as what you think you do. Like talk to me 5 years.
I do want to say, like, I love all of those pure intentions. And it's a very similar intention to where, like, how I first started in HR, but I was looking at it from a different angle. So I was working in healthcare, and there were all of these like decisions that were just kind of like luminous. Like, I wasn't really sure, or ominous. Like, they were just happening. And I was like, who's making these decisions? Some of these decisions seem real dumb. And I was young, but I still like had a really strong opinion on how things were going to be done, which right then and there, I should have known I was going to be an entrepreneur someday. But I was like, who the heck's making these decisions? And a lot of times it would be like HR. And so after working in this organization for like 3 years, I was like, hi, I would like to work in human resources because I think I can make an impact on some of these decisions. Like, I've been an employee here. I see the way this plays out. I know how your kudos box is received and how these shifts are set up and, like all this stuff. I know the time clock is like from 1981 and I'm needing you to update that, please. And, just like some of these practices. And so I was like, I'm going to go work in HR. Well, I went up to the HR department on my break and I was like, hello, I am your next HR department, like personnel member. How do I make this happen for myself? And they said, you've got to have HR experience to work in human resources here. And like, okay, well, right then and there, if, current me, if I could talk to young me, I would say, then there's not an HR mentor in this department, or they don't feel strong enough in their skills, or they're overwhelmed, they're not treated well here, and they know only seasoned professionals can last. Like, it's speaking something about the culture right then and there. But I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I love working here, so I'm going to go work in HR somewhere else. And then I'm going to come back here because I love this place. I love a lot about the culture, the pillars. I liked working in healthcare. I thought it was a really good fit my little nurturing lady heart. So I went and worked in HR thinking that I was going to go learn HR and then come back. And boy, did I get a purview into HR. I did my first reduction in force, like I really got in there. And what I realized after that first true HR role was I only want to work in a place where HR can be strategic. I don't know what those people were doing over there, but I want to work in the private sector where HR makes a true impact. And that's been the areas where I've been the happiest, but I also got the data aspect of HR. And I never really got into that like super culturally. Well, I say that I worked at like a Google type company. So I've seen the black and white. I've seen the extreme gray. Like my job for a while was conducting investigations on the IM system because there was an affair going on. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen both sides. This firm that we're running is in the middle. I want you to have all the policies, but I also recognize that we're dealing with humans and we need to treat them accordingly. Like, to your point, they've got issues going on in their personal lives, but yeah, it's kind of a roller coaster. Most people have no clue of really what working in HR is.
And I think what you just described too kind of speaks to all of the stereotypes that we've talked about today, because it sounds like what you walked into in hopes of making change really was that stereotypical box of we have this way and we have this structure and this is how it's going to be. And if you don't understand how the structure works, then you don't fit into the mold. Like, we just, our wheels that turn here are pushing out policy and making sure people are clocking in and out on your 1982 time clock. And there's no ambition to change how it's done. And so I completely agree with you when you have those larger organizations that are kind of like the conglomerate of like their structure is so set that they don't want anybody coming in and upsetting the apple cart, if you will. If you're an HR person or want to be an HR person, like, those are not the places for you. Like, I would encourage anybody to start smaller, find a smaller business and listen, like, find one that's a mess. Find one that doesn't have anything or know anything, because you're going to learn so much by picking up all of those pieces, and you're going to learn how to build a structure and you're going to learn what works and what doesn't. Don't walk into somewhere where everything's built. Like, if you really want to learn, find something that's smaller, find something that's a mess, and then make it into something great.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Cutting your teeth in a small business where you're going to get to dabble, it's actually going to make it harder for you if you step into a corporate role later because you're going to be like, don't be putting me in this compensation lane or this benefits only lane or this disciplinary action lane, because you're going to be like, I've seen the field, and that's where the magic happens. And that's like my favorite clients to work with today, most challenging clients, but are those small to mid-sized businesses that are freaking messy. But they also know that there's a need. They don't know what the need is exactly. They just know there's a need. And so you've got a lot of room to run and play and make that impact, which is why we all got into HR in the first place, is to help, to serve.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Agreed.
let's talk about shifting some of these stereotypes. And, before we go into that, I took some time before the episode to go through some of them. So we talked about policy police. We've talked about how HR is only for women. HR only cares about the company. We've kind of touched on how HR professionals are not business savvy, that HR is reactive instead of proactive, being paper pushers. HR is all about hiring and firing. We kind of call that cradle to grave HR. HR has no real power. We've talked about the seat at the table, the stereotype of the burnt HR pro. So one more that I want to talk about before we talk about shifting these stereotypes is that HR avoids tough conversations, which is a laughable one for us because you and I like go straight in for the jugular. Like that's just like our natural disposition. But I see this stereotype and I've worked with lots and lots of HR leaders, but I want to step out, not just HR leaders. We could just say leaders that like will not have the tough conversation. How do you dispel that notion that HR shies away from addressing uncomfortable topics?
I would say, unfortunately, that is probably an accurate stereotype. And that goes back to saying you have a large majority of your HR professionals who you are just pushing out the policies and doing, what you're asked and having that structure. And so you don't get pulled into those tough conversations. Normally the decision is made for you and you're like, all right, cool. I'll take that and I'll do whatever it is you're asking me to do with it. It's hard for me to answer the question, admittedly. And this, again, completely agree with you that I am a very direct person. And so I'm not sure that even the younger version of me, new to HR or operations, that I've ever shied away from a tough conversation. So, but I think by and large, it is a factual statement to say that, we don't have the hard conversations. The definition of hard conversation for an HR professional would be telling somebody, no, you're not getting this time off, or, hey, we're putting you on a performance improvement plan, or, hey, we're doing layoffs, or you're terminated. Like those are the hard conversations. And I think even then, like if you don't have that mental fortitude, those are hard conversations to have. It makes it uneasy. It makes you anxious. And it's learning to not let those things kind of sway, your emotions. Like you really do have to take the emotion out of it and your feelings out of it, because business is business. And I think after you find that you remove some of that, it's easier to have those tough conversations. I don't think that we're going to overnight dispel the notion that we're not having the tough conversations, because what a business owner sees as having a tough conversation is very different than what we as HR professionals see as having a tough conversation. So you just have to do it. And I'm not saying like be harsh, and I'm not saying don't have feelings and don't have empathy for people, but there is an aspect of removing that emotion from it to be able to have the conversation. Just say it like it is. Be real. It impacts the business. It impacts somebody's lives. You just have to be honest. Like be the most brutally honest version of yourself that you can be, because it will serve everybody well at the end of the day. It might not feel good when it comes out of your mouth, but it will. But it will be. Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say like this is where we're not called to be nice. We're called to be kind, and
Yeah.
truth is kind, because we can actually do something with the truth. Like if we're not performing as an employee and no one shares that with us, and then we just get passed up for the promotion and we just don't get the raise and we don't get told the truth, that's not kind, because weren't even given the opportunity to perform. And so kindness is offering the truth, even though it makes our hearts go pitter patter. We have to remind ourselves like, after this conversation, I'm not the one who has to deal with this. The person that I hand this information to, now they get to make a choice. I'm going to receive the feedback, I'm going to improve, or F these people, I don't want to work here anymore, whatever it is. Like, I don't believe in this feedback, but they get to make the choice. But if you don't give them that honest feedback, you're taking the choice away from them, and that's unkind.
Yep. No, I totally agree. And I think that's a big aspect of what I would consider to be servant leadership is, again, even when it doesn't feel great, your goal is to help people be better. And they can't be better and they can't make changes and they can't even save themselves if you're not being honest with them. And if your goal is to be a servant leader and you want everybody to be successful, and if you are really teaching and if you're advocating and doing all of those things, it requires honesty.
Yeah. And it also requires you knowing that you're not always going to get liked. It's kind of like being a good mom or a good parent. Like, I'm here to help. I'm not always here to be the easy girl or whatever.
HR should be the friend that tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. HR is like, you got something in your teeth.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yes. So let's shift some of these stereotypes. Like, we've been in this world and we've both sat in these corporate seats. How has transitioning to consulting, have you noticed any new stereotypes about HR that surprised you or different than what you encountered in your corporate seats?
I don't think so. I mean, I think everything that we've touched on today really speaks to what the stereotype of the HR profession is as a whole. I don't think that I've come across anything new that I didn't already expect walking into it. You referenced having some calls with people and asking, are you in the red? Are you in the black? And that kind of sets them back in their seat. And it's moments like that kind of validate what those stereotypes still are and exist today, because they don't expect it. They don't expect you to know and understand the business. They don't expect for you to really care and understand, the P&L and what that looks like and the impact that it has on the rest of the business. And so I wouldn't say that I've seen anything different. I would say that I definitely strive to make sure that if I'm walking into an organization in a consulting capacity, that by the time I leave, they understand that there's more value to HR than just making handbooks and writing policies. And so my goal is always to make sure that I'm setting whoever that next person is, whether, they're going to hire an HR manager, an HR director, or even at the executive level, I'm making sure that I'm setting that person up for a little bit more success, because they're going to have a bigger seat at the table by the time that I'm done. That is my goal, is to make sure that whoever it is that walks in there is going to be respected and be heard, and it will just build for better relationships. So that's what I try to do anyway. And I think arguably we're both pretty good at that, because it's hey, there is more to this profession and it is more valuable, and it should be seen that way.
Yeah. It never offends me when somebody comes to me and says hey, we need a performance review process. Do I see that they need 80 other things immediately? Yes. But I love that they've identified something. Now I know what they're passionate about, or at least what they know might be a shortcoming. And that gives me the space to wiggle around and say okay, yes, let's build that. So what do your job descriptions look like? Do you have any career ladders? How have we been holding people accountable up until now? What have raises look like? Give me some historic context. And usually what happens is, and I'm not doing that to belittle anybody. I'm just literally before I put a performance review process in place, I just got a few little questions. And what ends up happening is we write job descriptions. We put the career growth ladders in place. I do a comp data study to make sure that we're paying our people accurately and, see where our shortcomings are and put them all plotted in a pay scale. And what I've ended up doing for a lot of organizations is said okay, so we're going to go ahead and implement this performance review process. Once I get through these steps, we're going to put it in place. But after we do that, we're also going to do an employee engagement survey to make sure we're holding up our end of the deal as an employer. Because when's the last time you've been evaluated? And let's just get some actionable data. And I have seen, whether it's been a law firm or a construction company, the beauty that comes from that and the miles that they get down the road with their teams. And then therefore further productivity, it's impacting the bottom line positively. And it's there it is. There's the magic of HR. But, just thinking can you do a handbook audit? Yeah, for sure. We can do that. But this is the baseline. There's so much to be done on top of that.
Yep. And when you go in and you can showcase all of those things, like I said, it sets the next person up for success, because now the business leaders or the owners, like they have a much deeper understanding of what that value is that you can bring to the table and how all of those pieces are interconnected. Like to your point, you started talking about how it's performance reviews, but you can't really do this piece without these four others at the top. And these things are connected to a much broader scope of things. You should be looking at it at 30,000 feet all the time. And unfortunately, it's tunnel vision with, I need this aspect of HR, at least what I think I need is just this piece. And you're like, yeah, well, that's great. I can do that, except you're going to need X, Y, and Z before we can even touch this piece of it. And so again, finding that space and showing them this is a great big ball of things that you need. And it's going to make your life easier. It's going to be painful in some parts of it and you're not going to like it. And it might cost some money and that sounds icky, but I bet you I'll make it up on the backside if we get you set up right.
Yes. Okay. So not that this is a sales pitch for the HR pros that are sitting inside of an organization, but what has it been like moving from being the HR pro inside of one organization day in and day out to moving to this consulting firm?
It's freeing. It's freeing. And I say that because, we've talked about having those hard conversations or what the expectation is, or, heaven forbid, not having a seat at the table. Every time I say that now, I'm going to enunciate more because I know you love it. And so it's freeing in that I don't have to be worried about having those conversations, and you don't have to like me. Like if we're not a good fit, we're not a good fit. If you don't like having those hard conversations and you don't want me to tell you like it is, and if you're not really interested in me setting you and your business and your people up for success, that's fine. That's fine. If you're not ready to have those conversations and make real strategic change that will, in fact, impact the rest of your business, that's fine. When you sit inside of an organization, you might have those conversations and somebody, they'll naysay it and you never truly get to make an impact in some cases. Like you get stuck in this box and it is what it is. And, especially when you get into the larger organizations where, like you spoke about, here's your lane for benefits and here's your lane for, leave policies or whatever the case may be. You don't have to worry about those pieces of it in a consulting capacity because they might bring us on for, again, we need you to audit the handbook and I want you to take a look at these agreements or whatever. But then you can say, but you also need X, Y, and Z. And either they can take that and they can say, you know what, that sounds like a really good idea. And you can share with them what the end goal and the end result is likely to be if you can get your hands on this whole number of things. Or they won't, and that's fine. And so you can kind of pick and choose when and how to have those conversations. And if it's the right person, you get a lot more respect. A lot of times they're coming to you and they're saying, hey, we recognize that we need help with something. And so they're already really more open than what you would find within an organization. And so it makes it a lot easier. It's more freeing. You don't have to be worried about stepping on people's toes and making sure that you're not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. You don't feel like you have competition within your own team of or who's doing the most work and, are we being heard? Like, do you see me above everybody else? You don't have to worry about any of that. Like you can be you can be real, you can make an impact. And if people don't like it or they don't want it, you don't have to. And it's that simple.
Yeah.
You'll like it a lot more. Not to be a sales pitch, but you'd like it a whole lot more.
I know. Oh my gosh, it's magic. I was talking to a client this morning and we were like 5 minutes into the call. It's a new person at the client. I've never spoken to this individual before. And she was talking and I was like, hey, not to cut you off, but you've paid me to do this. So I'm just going to share my 2 cents here. And then if it's not a good fit, that's fine with me. I'm not trying to sell to you. I only want to work with people that want to work with us. And there are so many different options out there that not everyone's going to want to work with us. But then some people are going to listen to this call and be like, oh my gosh, these 2 would change my business. Those are the people that we want to call. We don't want somebody to call and be like, you got to sell to me because I don't know if I care about any of this. Please don't email.
We're not for everybody.
Right. Go find someone to push your paper around or whatever. That's totally fine. Yeah. You need somebody to do that too. It's probably an office manager. You don't need a high level HR person to be doing any of that. But it's been such a gift to work with people who see the need and let us deliver. And it doesn't mean forever. Like this client anyway, after I spit out this kind of, a little bit of my boldness this morning, at the end of the call, she was like, so what's your goal here? Like, and I was like, oh my gosh, now she's feeling me out to see if I want to like work in this organization. And I was like, hey, let me be clear. Like, we've got a great pipeline. I'm working with a lot of great clients. Like, if this doesn't work out from a consulting perspective, then no, I don't have a desire to like become a W-2 employee for you. I want to come in and make an impact, scoop my little rear end around and make space for the next HR person. And if I do it right, you hire me at that strategic level. I create the foundation. I make sure your HR technology is in place. We get everything. And then you can hire probably an HR director or an HR manager at a much lower cost than what I would cost as a full-time W-2 benefits loaded employee. And you can save money by, doing this at the beginning, where I'm going to build your foundation out in a way that no green HR person is ever going to do. And she was like, okay, let's talk in January. And again, it wasn't a sales pitch. It's just the reality if you hire a good consultant to come in. So I love playing in all these spaces and making an impact. Yep. I'm so glad. And I want to say that you saw the light, but I know you saw it a decade ago. You were just like in there trying to help, other organizations. But if you're an HR pro and you're like, oh, that sounds so good, it's because it is. And you ought to find a firm to join. Maybe we'll grow in 2025. Maybe we'll be looking for the right person, but we are only desiring to work with people that can put their mouth on the microphone just like us.
Yep. Look at you recruiting.
I'm not even trying to. I don't even have an opening. But I'm just saying, like if there was somebody listening to us that's like, man, I pace with these women, it's like, okay, come show me. But otherwise, like that wouldn't be a right fit for Salt and Light. But there's maybe something else out there for them, because HR is a very admirable career, and I'm super glad I got into it. I actually love it when people say like, oh, I would hate working in HR. I'm like, sure you would, but I'm a boss at it. You know what I'm saying? It's not for everybody.
Yeah, as I said, we're not for everybody. I admittedly, I honestly enjoy having the hard conversations. And what I would say to any business owner out there who has an HR professional in your organization, like if you don't have that type of relationship with them where that you guys can butt heads and have those types of conversations, and then, come back to the table and say, all right, we're good. Let's do X, Y, and Z and move this thing forward. You find somebody else.
Yeah.
Else, you don't have the right person. Like if you don't have a great relationship with your HR person where you can have those types of conversations, find somebody else. You're not doing it right.
Yep. If you've got that hole sitting in you right now where you're like, oh man, my organization needs this, like go find somebody who can. I totally agree. Well, yeah. Tara, I have loved this. And, if it's up to me, I have you back on the pod. That's, TBD if you decide to show back up on this podcast. But where can the people find you? And here's something that I haven't said so far. Obviously, you might have caught on here at the end. So Tara actually works as one of the fractional CHROs at Salt and Light Advisors, which is a firm that we founded in April of 2023. So she's accessible there, but also where can the people find you?
Is that a serious question?
What's your address? I mean, like, do you have like LinkedIn? Where would you like people to find you?
I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Kerri will tag some emails in here. My cell phone's pretty accessible if you Google my net. You can find me just about anywhere. And admittedly, I'm really bad about putting down my phone or not answering emails a lot of times. So there's a high probability that as soon as you ping me, you're going to hear right back.
I love that. Yep. I am action oriented and so are you. And I love that. Well, Tara, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights and your HR wisdom and just your general business wisdom with us today. It's been an incredible conversation. I know our listeners have got to be walking away with a deeper understanding of HR's role as a strategic partner in business and beyond. So for those of you tuning in, I encourage you to reflect on the stereotypes we shared and think about how you can challenge them in your workplaces, either from your HR seat or from a leadership seat, and what you can do moving forward. So leading people can feel like chaos. And Tara and I can both say for sure that dedicating yourself to a career in HR is chaos a lot of times. But in that chaos is power and transformation. So don't waste the chaos. Embrace it. Until next time.